Welcome to the U.S. Manufacturing Today podcast, your hub of information about the U.S. manufacturing and distribution industry. Brought to you by Veryable, the on-demand labor solution revitalizing and optimizing your operation, enabling just-in-time response to demand, more efficient production, and lower cost per unit. And now your host and head of reindustrialization at Veryable, Matt Harine.
Welcome back to U.S. Manufacturing Today, the podcast powered by Veryable, where we talk with the leaders, innovators, and changemakers shaping the future of American industry, along with providing regular updates on the state of the industry, the changing landscape, policy, and more. In this episode, we sit down with Rob Goldiez, the co-founder of Hirebotics, a company revolutionizing how manufacturers deploy robotics, making it as simple and scalable as possible. We'll dig into the intersection of robotics, reshoring, and the reindustrialization of America. And as U.S. factories face persistent challenges, Hirebotics offers a compelling answer. Collaborative robots, or Cobots, integrated through cloud software that adapts with your operation, without the traditional complexity or the CapEx required. We'll explore how labor utilization strategies are evolving, why automation and reshoring and labor aren't at odds but tightly aligned, what scalable operations look like in a modern industrial economy, and how cobots fit into the future of U.S. competitiveness on the global stage. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you having me.
You've got an impressive background in operations and automation. Can you walk us through what led you to founding Hirebotics and what problem you saw in the market?
By trade, I'm an engineer, background engineering and an MBA. And so I've been in kind of business and management roles for a while, but I've been involved in manufacturing companies for quite some time as like an operator type person at other people's companies. Very enamored with American manufacturing, local manufacturing. The closer you can make something to where it's going to be consumed seems like an obvious thing. And maybe my technical background in engineering and computer type stuff, always looking for ways to automate things, whether it's through software or otherwise. Got introduced to collaborative robots, or Cobots as they're called, in 2014. I was running a small subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, and we made electric motors and literally neon power supplies. It's where I eventually found my co-founder, Matt. But, we needed to automate to compete with China, right? We were making these things right here in Nashville, Tennessee, and our competition was thousands of miles away in China. And so for us, the way we thought we needed to compete was, how do we make the people we have as productive as possible by using automation where it makes sense and giving them that force multiplier. And we found back in 2014, collaborative robots. We use arms from Universal Robots. A lot of times people think of robotics as like big, scary things that are in cages. And, it's like to keep the robots from the people and the people from the robots. And they're kind of, so to speak, looking at each other through the cages. Cobots are an interesting thing because they are designed to work around people. You certainly need to make sure that the task is safe for humans to be around, but the robot itself is safe to be around humans. And so when you start to not need a cage for a robot, it starts to unlock some interesting applications where humans and robots can collaborate, which is where the name came from, to do tasks. And so we put in initially 2, and then this is at the company prior to Hirebotics, but we put in 2 and eventually I think up to 14 or something Cobots on these various lines. And it might just, be to transfer something from one conveyor to another or clip wires on an electric motor, but different things that were hard to staff for, or to augment the people that were there as a way to give them, like an assistant, like a worker that was going to help them be more productive. The idea for Hirebotics came about in the summer of 2015. This sounds really corny, but this is how it happened. I was on a cruise with my family in the Caribbean somewhere and woke up in the middle of the night and had this idea of like Uber and Airbnb are disrupting the industries that they're in with this new business model. Everything's getting cloud connected and automation is still really hard. You buy a robot and it's just a thing in a box and you got to figure out, what do you attach to it? What does it do? How do you program it? And it's kind of that overarching theme that we were trying to solve, or had the idea to solve, was how do you make automation as easy as hiring a person? So this is back in 2015. So I woke up in the middle of the night on this cruise and started jotting down notes. Like there was no business name, right? It was just ideas, right? But these triangulation of things, which felt like maybe there's something here. And really noodled on the idea for several months and brainstormed it with some friends and stuff. And later in 2015, decided to start Hirebotics.
You touched on a few key points there that people think about these things in terms of automation or other buzzwords like AI, like how does it replace things? And really it's about uplifting the resources that you already have. And I really want to dive into how Hirebotics views labor. It's not just as some type of constraint, but more of like a strategic asset that we view it as variable, but how it can be enhanced through your technology.
Sometimes companies come to us or have come to us and they're looking to replace people. And that's usually not a good sign of future success for that company or for us. What is prevalent almost in every manufacturer, and I'm sure you've seen this and your customers feel this, is that they struggle to find people. And so the tasks I feel like we're trying to help solve is not how do you replace people? They can't find people, right? They're short staffed. They have openings on first shift. Maybe they're trying to get a second shift going. There's some constraint around people and trying to get the job done. And so we like best when people look at what we do as a way to supplement their people and give them a force multiplier. And so a huge gap in our background, my background in Hirebotics, but like we focus on welding today. And we really look at it as a force multiplier. This is not replacing welders that you have. This is how do you make the welders you have more productive, right? So it's a tool for the workers that you have. Maybe, the average age of a welder is, I think, in the late 50s right now. And every year it keeps going up because new people aren't entering as fast as people are exiting. So the average age keeps moving up. And there's a lot of skilled welders out there in the world and in the country. And so if you can give them a tool to be more productive, they can get more done in the day. They are going to extend their careers. They're going to go home and be happier. They're going to do tasks that they didn't have time for during the day. And so automation is just one tool, one piece of the puzzle to make the humans more productive.
No, you bring up a really great point there on utilization and labor utilization, because it's something we hear a lot of at Veryable. People are looking for a plug and play welder or somebody. I can't find welders is a common refrain. You and I had talked previously about an amazing stat that we see all the time, but maybe others in the market don't. The utilization rate of welders who are actually on the job is quite low. And I don't want to steal the thunder, but you gave me that statistic. What was it, 40% or 50%?
Not my statistic originally, right? But I think American Welding Society cites that like the average arc on time for a welder, which is they're pulling the trigger, they're making sparks, right? They're joining metal. The average arc on time is 15%, 1.5. So you think about over the course of a week, right? 40-hour shift, like the work being done, the arc on, right? Their job is to weld is about 6 hours. That's not to say that they're sitting around doing nothing, right? There's just other tasks that they do. Maybe they're trying to fit things up. Maybe they're checking prints. Like there's work that's being done. But when people think about welding, they are oftentimes surprised at that stat and guarantee people listening to the show is like, well, my welders are much higher than that. Like, okay, maybe so. But the average, right, according to American Welding Society, is somewhere around 15%.
Right. I just stepped right into it because I think I tripled the average time of utilization just off the cuff there. So, that's something that we see a lot of at Veryable as well, where it's the utilization rate. It's not necessarily a shortage. And certainly there are shortages based on skill sets, shortages based on geographies, some of those types of things. And it's mostly about labor access, but also the types of tools that they're using. And if it hasn't stepped into this, modern industrial economy, they're going to be faced with persistent challenges from places like China. Your competitors are thousands of miles away. There's certainly no shortage of a labor issue in China. They're bringing people out of the provinces. They almost have this floating structure of people who come in and work. And Chinese New Year is usually the downtime that they experience. So you're competing on a global scale constantly, whether you know it or not, certainly in the productivity realm.
That's right. You may not like it. You may not look at them as competition, right? But that's real competition.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of China and talking about some of the challenges in the American manufacturing sector, we are seeing a wave of reshoring efforts across industries, a lot in manufacturing. In your view, what role does automation, cobots, all the above play in making U.S. manufacturing more cost competitive?
It is one tool to that puzzle, and it is an interesting dynamic that we're all facing, right? And regardless of how people feel about the changing dynamics, the dynamics won't stop changing, right? Like it is a dynamic marketplace and those changes continue to accelerate. And so I think for any company, they have to look at new ways to solve old problems. Those old problems are, I've got to deal with backlog. I've got to deliver quality products, right? I've got to do it efficiently, cost them competitively. And like those are the same overarching problems and just kind of new things that are sort of disrupting those things that you got to sort of solve. And so we look at automation or cobots and what we do as one tool to have predictable cost, quality, availability of welding talent. If you look at bringing in a cobot, oftentimes people will, to do welding at least, oftentimes our customers will see 3 to 4x improvement in output. And sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's less, but that's sort of an average. And these are typically being run by welders, right? So this is not a solution where you just wheel this thing in and it's just going to do work, right? We have a cloud connected product, so we have a lot of data on how people use the product, and that informs us on what we should build and how we improve it. But when somebody hits go on a part till it's done is just under 2 minutes. So that's about 2 minutes of work that's being done by the robot before it's needing human intervention to swap out a part, reposition, or whatever they're doing. Our solution is not you throw a bunch of work at it, you leave for the day, right? There's a welder around, he's loading parts, he's checking things. He may be welding on parts that are too complicated, or something, that is not a good fit for the cobot, but it's making that welder significantly more productive.
That's such a fascinating example because we could talk about utilization. And I think the word that I like to use for it is the compression of operations time, like basically enhancing the productivity into shorter cycles and augmenting and, adding layers or removing layers of complexity, out of the human hand, but basically upskilling at the same time that worker and getting more productivity and more throughput and more output at the end of the day. What are some examples you've seen where cobots maybe enabled reshoring or some type of operational scale up?
On the reshoring side, when you have smaller and smaller batch sizes, right? So higher mix, which seems to continue to happen, right? Having the flexibility of a tool that shows up every day and is going to be as productive at 8 a.m. as it is at 4 p.m. gives people more flexibility and more output. And that seems to be a key theme in today's, dynamic changing environment and reshoring. Oftentimes, something companies haven't thought of is if it's like they're driving the Jeep and the wheels are spinning, right? They're just kind of going down the same path. It's like, I got to find welders. I got to go call this temp agency. And they think about solving the problem in the same way they did 10 or 15 years ago. And there's just new ways to do it, right? I think you guys take an innovative approach to solving that staffing problem. We take another approach, which is putting a tool in the hands of the people you have and getting more output out of them. And so those are themes that our customers are asking about, pain points that they're trying to solve, which drives them sometimes to a solution like a collaborative robot or cobot for doing their welding tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something really great there. It's about getting more out of the worker. And I think what we've seen, especially in, the reshoring movement, is people looked at cost out as a way to enhance the bottom line. So basically offshoring the labor, ultimately to drive the wages down and take a step back from the American labor market, American manufacturing. And cost out doesn't necessarily mean it's better goods or better quality or anything along those lines. It just means that you found something cheaper and you're not getting anything better for it. And the ramifications for that have been pretty astounding. I think we've seen an undermining of the American manufacturing sector for years, and now all this comes roaring back into the 21st century with more automation, more cobots, and an upskilled workforce of people who are engaging on different types of technology, which, specifically about your technology. And one thing that stands out about Hirebotics is the focus on ease of deployment and the cloud integration. And like you said earlier, you just don't order a robot that shows up and becomes self-aware and decides to get right to work. Why is simplicity such a key to broader adoption in these manufacturing environments? And is it really fitting well right now with how people are looking to invest in their business and potentially reshore operations?
We sell a solution in a box. And when I say solution in a box, I truly mean it, right? We've chosen to standardize our product. We don't want to solve every problem. Sometimes companies think about automation, particularly ones that don't have any. And they're like, I want a robot that will load parts, do this, and they want to be able to just walk away and work gets done. And that is oftentimes unachievable, extremely expensive, and they're trying to solve the 99% problem versus 85% of it with a robot. So we kind of try to solve the middle of the fairway problem, help make the welder more productive with a cobot. So we focus, that ease of deployment, we focus on selling a solution in a box, which allows us to have standard setup instructions. It's a self-installed product that ships quickly, in-app tutorials and things like that. The simpler you can make it to use, the simpler you make it to set up, the quicker they can start to alleviate that pain point. And when we think about our user, right, who's using our technology, we really focus on the welder, not the robot programmer. Because in our view is if you're building a product, a robotic product or an automation product for robot programmers, now you're just trading your problems, right? I can't find welders I can't find robot programmers. Or you have one guy that can do the robot programming. So we really try to, this sounds cliche, but we want to democratize automation. So we focus on ease of use. That app-based literally means our software to run the robot is on an iPhone, Android, tablet, web browser, whatever the user wants, and really making it easy for that welder. That is our customer, right? How do we make that welder more productive?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to double up the knowledge transfer problem in the workforce where you have this one funnel. And I've been at plenty of companies where there's one guy who knows how to program, XYZ piece of equipment. And then you've got the added layer of complexity of what's the work we actually do, which is welding, for example. That's a big enough challenge in itself, not making the operation more complex. Another great follow-up to that would be, what does ROI typically look like? The time to value, the cost versus, maybe traditional methods, increased flexibility. What's the What's the time horizon on that, and how do you talk about that with manufacturers?
Our common heuristics around, what's the framework that people should be thinking about? And it's going to depend for every company, but customers are typically seeing 3 to 4x improvement in output. And output is the key metric for us and our customers, more so than how fast does the robot move and things like that. At the end of the day, if it moves fast and waits for a long time, doesn't really matter. The system roughly costs $100,000, 3 to 4x productivity improvement. Oftentimes people are seeing an ROI in less than a year, but again, it depends on the application. We've had some customers that have moved from one welding process to another, not just automating it, but moving from TIG welding to MIG welding and seeing much higher productivity improvements. And some customers are doing pretty well by hand, and they're just seeing something a little bit less, but roughly about a year in terms of an ROI.
Yeah, that is fast. A lot of companies have to look at these as like a CapEx type structure, which, hopefully there's good news on the way. I think legislation for some tax policy and regulatory policy changes that are coming down the way are looking at making those more deductible, maybe for R&D, some of those things, which have got to be great for people who are looking to invest. It does bring up a really interesting question about how can small and mid-sized manufacturers participate in this evolution of what we see on the factory floor without being left behind? Because as you and I have talked about before, most of the manufacturing businesses in the country, somewhere above 90%, are what we would consider small, medium-sized businesses.
What we see is a few challenges that we want to help them overcome, right? One is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes small to mid-sized companies don't have familiarity with automation, or at least don't have it in-house. Maybe they don't have robotics. Maybe they have one, but they rely on an outside party that it can sometimes be expensive, or they use it for a project years ago. So it's got to be easy so that it's approachable to the small to mid-sized enterprise. The other side of it is how they pay for it. And so we try to meet customers where they're at. We have try before you buy. So, think of that as like a rental option. We have financing partners if people want to finance it. And oftentimes people are just, when they're ready and it feels right, they'll make the investment, and capture that ROI. People will ask about training. Sometimes they want to bring their welders to us. We love that because it kind of shows the buy-in of the people on the floor versus just a top-down management, which happens at times, right? The owner is like, we got to get a robot in here, and he comes and visits us and he buys it. And then the people on the floor are like, what is this? How do we use it? Some of those keys to success beyond ease of use and how do you pay for it is getting the buy-in and getting those champions on the floor, right? When your employees embrace technology, you're going to get a lot more out of it than when it's forced on them.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think one of the questions that I have about it and that intersection, and going back to what you said earlier about the knowledge transfer and somebody who kind of runs the program, how does automation at a bigger picture intersect with workforce development? I'm not talking about, manufacturing labor specifically in this, but overall, are there new skills that schools and trade schools and others should be training for that align with the future, where this is kind of an integrated part of a workforce strategy or a productivity strategy?
I think so. I think, at the very base level, getting people that are going through training programs, high school programs, trade schools, comfortable around robots and technology. Like it is a tool for them. And it's no different than, I'll say, desk workers leveraging AI to help with tasks, right? Like the more comfortable they are and exposed to it, the more they will embrace it. We have customers of ours that are schools and educational institutes that use these for training programs. A recent customer of ours is actually in California, 4 different, I think they're like high schools that have vocational programs that brought in 4 different ones kind of in the same county, brought in a system at each school because as they already teach welding and they want to level up their students at that early age and show them what's possible and get them comfortable with technology. And so we do see that happening earlier, sooner. I think it makes the workforce that, think about it from a school perspective, the more competitive you can make your students, right? You got to help them make them competitive if you want to be a viable school over the long term. And so starting wages for different skills, things like that, the more you can get them trained up, the more competitive they'll be in the marketplace, which means the more competitive the school is in the marketplace.
We've had several guests on the show, including Jim Vinoski, who is kind of a champion for this type of move into manufacturing. And years ago, it wasn't really the third way. There was this track for just college or this track for just whatever somebody was going to do after high school, and how manufacturing has really turned into a popular destination for people coming out of high school and is a great alternative, and one that looks like it has a really sustainable future. If you were to give advice to a manufacturer who wanted to automate, but they're unsure where to start, what would you advise them?
Start small, go for the obvious, don't go for the hardest. I think the trap that we see people start to fall into, we try to pull them back, is, sometimes the hardest pain that you have is not the best place to start automating. It could be. And it's the easy, repetitive stuff. Maybe your employees are okay doing it because they don't want to do the hard stuff. But there are tasks that humans are just better at doing. And there are tasks that robots are better at doing. And so it's like, starting to sift through those things. Is it repetitive? And that doesn't mean 100 million a year. Might not mean 10,000 a year, right? It could mean 10 a week, 50 a week. But where is there repetitive work that you could take your human labor and put them on things where they're getting to use their mind a little bit more, right? They're using their dexterity and their eyes and all the different sensors that humans have that robots don't have. You want to sort of divvy up the types of things that humans do best from the things that robots could do best. And then I think it's starting to reach out and talk to people, right? It could be us, it could be others, but, understanding what people recommend, because I think it's pretty rare that if you're first time in automation and you're willing to share that with people like us or others, is that people want you to be successful, right? We want customers to be successful. We're not just looking to sell a product and have the company not be successful. And so you start to collect data from different potential providers to figure out, what are people saying? Are they all guiding me to the same thing? And I think involve your employees, right? They know things oftentimes if you ask them, and getting them involved in the process generates that buy-in.
Absolutely. That's really great advice. Rob, where can our listeners find out more about Hirebotics, about you and your thoughts on automation in the future in American manufacturing?
Definitely our website at hirebotics.com. We're also fairly active on LinkedIn. That's where most of our business customers are, and social media. And then we've got a fairly active YouTube channel. People want to kind of learn about the product, watch videos. Sometimes people don't want to reach out and hit a salesman, but you can watch videos and case studies and testimonials of customers that we have on YouTube that hear directly from them and on what problems they were trying to solve.
Yeah, that's a great resource. I know a lot of operations leaders who are very curious about this type of thing, and they kind of want to see it in action. So the YouTube channel is really big. Rob, thanks for coming on today, and a ton of great insight, and we really appreciate having you.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate the conversation.
To stay ahead of the curve and to help plan your strategy, please check out our website at variableops.com and under the resources section titled Trump 2.0, where you can see the framework around upcoming policies and how it will impact you. If you're on socials, give us a follow on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and leave us a rating, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you again for joining us and learning more about how you can make your way.